Seth Langford trusted two things without reservation: his instincts and a 1,200-pound gray Mustang that had put a farrier in the hospital. Ghost despised every human being on the property except Seth. So when the quiet, unremarkable physical therapist his sister had hired showed up on a Tuesday, and the horse, who had once kicked through 2 inches of solid hickory at the smell of a stranger, lowered his head completely and pressed his muzzle into the woman's open palm, Seth understood that whatever Mira Dunne was, she was not what she'd claimed to be. He didn't say a word. He stood at the fence line and watched, and he cataloged everything. 6 months earlier, Seth had been in Logar Province. His A-team had been tracking a logistics hub for a cartel-adjacent arms network that had somehow threaded itself into DoD contracting channels. The kind of arrangement nobody was supposed to know about, and that Seth and his men had stumbled into by accident during a completely different operation. 2 weeks after they'd filed the incident report up the chain, their convoy hit a pressure plate IED on a road that had been swept clean that morning. Seth's 2 front teeth were still somewhere in the Humvee's dashboard. His L4 and L5 vertebrae had been fused in a surgery that took 6 hours and left him with a right hand that worked about 70% of the time and a burning nerve pain in his left hip that didn't quit until around 3 in the morning, when exhaustion finally overrode it. He'd come back to Wyoming, to his father's ranch, not only to recover, but because it was the one place no one would think to look for him while the DOJ investigation crawled forward at its bureaucratic pace. The property sat 40 minutes from the nearest town, on a county road that washed out every spring and didn't appear on most mapping apps. His sister Carla came out twice a month with groceries and an expression she was working hard to keep neutral. Ghost had come with the property. The horse was 17 hands of uncooperative muscle and had been turned loose by his previous owner after destroying 3 stall doors. Seth had gentled him over 2 years into something approaching functional. The animal would tolerate Seth, would carry him, would stand still for grooming if Seth moved slowly enough. But Ghost remained a genuine threat to anyone else who entered the paddock, and nobody who'd watched him pace the fence line with that flat, calculating attention had argued the point. Seth couldn't manage the drive to a rehabilitation clinic every other day. The physical therapist who'd been doing house calls had quit after Ghost cleared the paddock fence and landed 8 feet from where the man had been standing. Carla had called the Meridian Group, a private medical staffing firm out of Denver. They'd sent Mira Dunne. She arrived in a Subaru Outback with a cracked bumper and a backpack that looked like it had seen better decades. She was maybe 30, slight, wearing a fleece pullover with university lettering faded to suggestions. Her hair was brown and pulled back without any particular care. She had the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd, not unpleasant, just quiet, like a room with the lights kept deliberately low. Her file said 8 years of clinical experience, trauma recovery, and spinal rehabilitation. Her license was current in 4 states. Her references read like a testimonial brochure. Seth was sitting on the porch when she climbed out of the car, and he noticed immediately that she didn't do what people usually did when they stepped onto unfamiliar property. She didn't look at the house first. She looked at the perimeter, the paddock, the outbuilding, the open space to the north where the tree line started, and she did it in about 4 seconds, casually, like she was just taking in the view. Then she looked at Seth and gave the small, professional smile of someone there to do a job. "Mr. Langford," she said, "I'm Mira. I'll be handling your PT sessions." She didn't react to the way he moved, the stiffness, the way he favored his left side, the mechanical quality of his right hand on the porch railing. Most people did something with their face when they first saw the extent of the damage. Mira Dunne just noted it, the way you'd note a weather forecast, and kept going. Ghost was in the far paddock when she first walked the property with Seth. The horse spotted her from 100 yards and went rigid, ears pinned, nostrils flared, that locked-up posture of an animal making a decision. He didn't charge. He tracked her, which was almost worse. She keeps her eyes down when she looks at him, Seth noticed that first afternoon. Not fearful, deliberate. Like she understood exactly what she was communicating. For the first 2 weeks, Mira Dunne was a precise and efficient presence. She arrived at 9 and left by noon, never late, never careless. Every time she positioned herself to work on his hip or his spine, she chose an angle that put her facing the door. When a truck backfired on the county road, and Seth's whole body went rigid, the way it still did sometimes, without warning, she didn't say anything hollow or reassuring. She just waited for his breathing to settle and then kept working. He was watching for tells. 11 years of hunting people who needed not to be found had made Seth very good at the grammar of deception, the micro-hesitations, the over-corrected ease, the moments when training slipped through the gap between stimulus and response. What he found in Mira Dunne unsettled him, more than if he'd found something definitive. She reacted to sudden noise the way trained people react. With attention, not alarm, her eyes going immediately to the point of entry rather than flinching away from it. She positioned herself in rooms with an unconscious tactical logic. She had calluses in unusual places. Not the friction calluses of someone who typed or gardened, but the specific toughened patches that came from sustained grip on things that required sustained grip. And there was Ghost. The horse had not warmed to her, but his hostility had shifted into something stranger. He watched Mira with the focused consideration of an animal encountering a known category it hadn't encountered in a long time. Not threat assessment, recognition. Seth tried to reason himself back from the edge. He was still on medication that made the shadows heavier than they needed to be. The DOJ case was moving, and he was supposed to be maintaining a very low profile. He was alone on a ranch in Wyoming in February. Isolation and chronic pain had a way of manufacturing enemies from ordinary people. He might have stayed in that reasonable place indefinitely if it hadn't been for the night of the storm. It came in hard from the northwest, the way Wyoming storms do. Like something that decided abruptly it was done being somewhere else. By 10 at night, the power was out. Seth was lying in the dark main bedroom with his phone and a growing unease about the sound the wind was making against the old tin roof. He heard Ghost before he saw anything, not the usual restless movement of the horse in his stall, but a full-threat scream. The sound a prey animal makes when it believes it is about to die. Seth made it to the doorway before his hip locked and drove a white-hot line of pain from his pelvis to his knee. He grabbed the doorframe. Through the window, he could see the paddock light swinging in the wind, throwing wild shadows, and the barn door, which he had latched himself that evening, hanging open. Ghost must have worked the sliding latch during the panic. He was heading for the kitchen and the back door when Mira appeared in the hallway. She wasn't supposed to be there. She'd left at noon. But she was standing in his hallway at 10 at night, a headlamp on her forehead and a portable lantern in her left hand, wearing the same jeans and fleece from that morning's session. "I drove back when the storm radar changed," she said simply. "You can't manage him in this condition alone." Before Seth could respond, Ghost's screaming hit a register that told him the horse was going through the barn wall inside of 30 seconds. Mira set the lantern on the counter and walked out the back door into the storm. Seth followed as fast as he could, which was not very fast. By the time he reached the barn, Mira was already inside. Ghost was in the center of the open space, wild-eyed, hindquarters bunched, cycling through a spin-and-kick sequence that would have killed anyone who misjudged his angle. The portable lantern threw jumping shadows across the walls. The horse's breath came in great visible plumes in the cold air, and he screamed again, with a sound that echoed off the metal walls and filled the whole building. Mira walked toward him. Not fast and not slow. She walked toward a 1,200-pound animal in full panic, as though she had done this 100 times in places considerably worse than a Wyoming barn. She killed the lantern. In the darkness, Seth could barely make out her silhouette against the single battery backup light on the far wall. She stopped about 8 feet from Ghost. Her right hand came up to chest height, not reaching toward the horse, not the way a person offers a hand or a treat. The hand rose slowly to mid-chest, palm facing inward. Then, in one deliberate motion, she rotated it outward, thumb dropping, fingers spreading, while her center of gravity sank into her knees, shoulders dropping. head tilting just enough that she was no longer meeting the horse's eyes at all. She held it. She just held it. Ghost's spin stopped, not gradually. He stopped the way a machine stops when you cut its power. All at once, mid-motion, a jarring halt. His ears swiveled forward. His head came down, lower and lower, until his nose was nearly at floor level. A long, shuddering exhale moved through his entire body, and then he stood still and simply breathed. The barn was completely quiet, except for the storm outside. Mira walked to him slowly. She laid her hand on the side of his neck without reaching over his head and stood there until his breathing evened out. Seth said nothing. He stood in the doorway and he cataloged. That hand rotation, that specific postural drop. He'd seen it once, in a classified briefing from a civil affairs officer who'd spent 18 months embedded with tribal elements in Kandahar province, the kind of unit whose designation you only encountered with a very specific clearance. The officer had shown footage. A special forces handler bringing down a panicked stallion in a village courtyard during an active operation, using exactly what Mira Dunne had just used. The officer had explained it was a Pashtun horsemanship gesture absorbed into SOF doctrine because civil affairs teams needed to manage animals without triggering chaos during sensitive operations in rural environments. The knowledge was classified. Not classified the way military secrets were classified. Classified the way things were classified when the number of people currently serving who knew the technique existed was somewhere around 35, and not one of them held a physical therapy license. He didn't sleep that night. In the morning, he waited until Mira's car was gone down the county road, then pulled out the encrypted phone he hadn't activated since his discharge. He called Adrian Sears. Adrian had been Seth's team sergeant for 6 years. He was currently in Raleigh, running private security consulting, but he had back channels into more databases than most people with active clearances. He answered on the second ring, and Seth could hear in his voice the particular alert quality of someone who had been half expecting this call. "I need a ghost protocol pull," Seth said. "Name Mira Dunne, physical therapist. Placed by the Meridian Group out of Denver." A pause. "Seth, are the meds?" "She's not a PT, Adrian." A longer pause. "Then, give me a couple hours." Seth spent those 2 hours going back over every session from the previous 2 weeks, with the clinical detachment he'd developed as a survival mechanism. In places where detachment was the only option. The way Mira had assessed his nerve damage in that first session. Fast, accurate, using pressure points that general rehabilitation training didn't cover, but combat medicine did. The way she had once, when he'd shifted unexpectedly during a hip mobilization process, braced his full weight with her forearm in a move that was pure muscle memory. The kind you built when you were regularly responsible for moving casualties. The way she had driven back through a snowstorm to a client's property at 10 at night, without being asked or compensated. Adrian called back in 90 minutes. "Her license is real," he said. He sounded strange. "Careful. Issued 3 years ago through a fast-track reciprocity transfer. Seth, her entire financial history starts 38 months ago. Before that, she doesn't exist in any civilian database I can get into." He paused. "I ran a photo match through a system I shouldn't still have access to. I got a partial hit before it kicked me out. I saw a task force identifier." "Which one?" "Task Force Ironwood," Adrian said. "That's bureau-level black operations. Domestic. The kind of unit that gets deployed when federal channels can't be trusted internally. If she's in your house undercover, someone pushed that from very high up." Another pause. "Seth, if she's there to protect you, you're probably fine. But if she's there too..." "I understand the alternative," Seth said. "Make some calls. Don't come out here without telling me first." He ended the call and looked at the window for a long time. That evening at 9 o'clock, Myra's headlights came up the drive. He let her in. He watched her hang up her jacket and set her bag on the kitchen chair and begin organizing her session materials with the familiar routine. She asked about his hip. He said fine. He watched her cross to the kettle, and the moment her back was turned, he moved to the chair. He was not subtle. He didn't have the margin for subtle. Inside the main compartment, the expected equipment. TENS unit, measuring tape, clinical supplies. He went deeper, found the secondary pocket at the bottom and pulled it open. No weapon. What was inside was a folded document, a printed operational brief in a format he recognized immediately because he had written dozens of them himself. His name on the first line, his current location, an aerial photograph of the ranch with heat signatures overlaid in red, and in the bottom right corner, beneath the mission authorization signature of an officer he didn't know. A smaller line of type, the name of the requesting officer who had initiated the operation. Adrian Sears. Mira's voice came from directly behind him. "Put it down, Seth." He turned. She was in the kitchen doorway, standing still, empty-handed. The PT was completely gone. What was left was stripped down and entirely real. "Sit down," she said. It was not a request. He sat. "Sears didn't retire," she said, pulling out the chair across from him and sitting with the unhurried precision of someone who had delivered information like this before and knew there was no good way to rush it. He moved laterally into a contracting firm that's been running logistics support for the same network you documented in Logar. He was the one who filed the route change for your convoy's last mission. He has been paid over $4 million across the last 2 years by entities associated with that network. She folded her hands on the table. When you survived the IED, he flagged you as an active liability to the people who needed you dead. The DOJ has the financial documentation. They need your live testimony to close the domestic side of the case. Task Force Ironwood was assigned through the Bureau to keep you alive long enough to give it. Seth's hands were flat on the table. He couldn't feel the right one. "He offered to run your background today," he said. "I know. When you called him, he flagged my cover. That means we have hours before he moves up his timeline." Mira reached across and closed the operational brief. "He won't come himself. There are 3 egress routes from this property. The first 2 will be covered within the hour. The third..." Seth's phone buzzed on the table. A text from Adrian. "On my way. Coming to help you. Do not let her leave the property." From the barn, Ghost screamed. Mira was at the kitchen window in 4 steps, her hand moving to the small of her back where her fleece met her jeans. She pulled so compact pistol Seth hadn't known was there and checked the chamber without taking her eyes off the north tree line. 3 coming in from the north, she said. 1 covering the south road. Get behind the kitchen island. Is there a firearm in this room? Office. Desk drawer. Go now. Seth went. He made the office in 8 seconds despite his hip, pulled the bottom drawer, found the SIG P-26 he'd kept cleaned and loaded since moving in. He heard the back door open and Mira's footsteps cross the porch boards and disappear into silence. 23 seconds of nothing. The first shot came from the north tree line, clipping the porch railing and sending a splinter through the kitchen window. Seth was already in the office doorway at an angle, covering the approach from the drive. A figure in dark clothing came around the east corner of the house and then stopped, sideways, because something enormous and fast had come out of the barn at a full gallop. Ghost hit the man like a vehicle, shoulder-checking him into the fence post with a crack. Seth felt in his back teeth. The horse didn't stop. He wheeled and went for the second figure coming up the drive, and that man ran. From the north tree line came 2 suppressed shots in quick sequence, then a third, then nothing. Then Mira's voice from somewhere past the fence line. North is clear. Seth covered the drive until she came around the corner of the house. Her left arm was moving differently than it should. Her right hand still held the pistol. You're hit, Seth said. Through and through, she said. I need your first aid kit. Adrian Sears arrived at the property at 11:47, alone, in a rental he'd picked up in Casper. He got out with his hands already raised, because Mira was standing at the property line with a federal identification badge that lit up the situation faster than any weapon could have. He looked at Seth over the roof of the car with an expression Seth had never seen on his face before, the expression of a man who had run the numbers and come up with a result he hadn't prepared for. Seth didn't speak to him. There was nothing to say that the arrest team couldn't say better and with considerably more authority when they arrived 40 minutes later. Seth sat on the porch steps with a blanket over his shoulders and a cup of coffee going cold in his right hand and watched the federal vehicles fill up his drive. His hip was burning. His right hand had gone completely numb in the cold. The night had that particular flat, used-up quality that comes after things that can't be taken back, and Seth sat in it and let it settle. Ghost was at the paddock fence, close enough to the porch that Seth could see the animal's breath rising in small clouds in the cold air. At some point, Seth hadn't noticed when, Mira had come to stand near the railing, her left arm wrapped and stabilized, her jacket pulled close. She wasn't looking at the horse. She was watching the federal vehicles, watching the processing, watching the way Adrian held himself as they walked him to a vehicle Seth didn't recognize. Ghost turned his head toward her, slowly, the way the animal did when he was deciding rather than reacting. His ears came forward. He stretched his neck across the top rail and pressed his nose into the back of Mira's hand. She didn't move toward him. She didn't make a sound. She just let him. Seth watched his horse, the one that trusted nobody, that had put a man in the hospital and cleared a fence that had no business being clearable, stand quietly in the dark against a stranger's hand and choose not to move away. "You're going to have to testify too," Seth said, "when this goes to court." "I know," Mira said. "About everything, cover included." "That's how it works." Ghost exhaled, a long, steady breath into the cold Wyoming air. There were things Seth still didn't know. How long Ironwood had been watching, what the full accounting of the network would show, how deep Adrian's arrangement had gone and for how long. The DOJ attorney would walk him through it eventually, in some fluorescent-lit conference room with bad coffee and a court reporter taking everything down in shorthand. He'd get the answers. He always did, eventually. But standing on the porch, steps in the dark, watching his horse hold still for the hand of a woman who had spent 3 weeks pretending to be the least remarkable person in any room she walked into. Seth understood that the most important question had already been answered the way things that mattered usually were, not in a briefing, not with documentation, not with anything that could be filed or cited or entered into evidence. Ghost had always known. Seth should have trusted the horse from the start.